Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation. The Morning Post arrived with an air of ceremony, as it always did in Hercule Poirot's orderly flat. The newspapers lay aligned as if on parade, the clock on the mantel ticked with a smug regularity, and the orchids, selected for their symmetry rather than their perfume, nodded in approval at the neatness of it all. Poirot, immaculate in a dove-grey suit and a tie like a careful stroke of paint, sat at the little breakfast table, where his coffee steamed and a single croissant waited for its equal halves. He did not pounce upon his letters, he introduced himself to them. The handwriting on each envelope received a moment's consideration, the slant, the pressure, the hesitation at the loops. One hand declared a bill, another an advertisement disguised as opportunity, and a third, on good vellum with a crest subtly blind embossed, announced itself as an invitation. Poirot opened that one last, not to prolong suspense, but to place attention where it was deserved. The seal had been broken and repressed. He noticed the slight glare where the wax had been warmed and coaxed back. Inside, the letter was brief and tremulous in ink more faded than its age required. Monsieur Poirot. You do not know me, but I have long known your name. If reputation can be trusted, you are discreet, and if discretion has value, then I am willing to pay for it in comfort rather than coin. I am Lady Fenton of Fenton Manor, Surrey. I propose a small house gathering this Friday evening, only a handful of guests, people I must keep close for reasons you may imagine but I cannot yet confess. The purpose, ostensibly, is pleasant, to show an item I have lately reacquired for the family, a silver casket with a curious latch. The true purpose I prefer to tell you in person. I beg you to attend. Your presence alone will be a protection. Yours faithfully, Evelyn Fenton. A postscript, squeezed into the margin, betrayed agitation. P.S. Please do not acknowledge this letter by return post. If you must, ring me briefly at 3 o'clock, 3 rings only, and I shall be prepared. We may speak of a lamp ordered for the morning room. Poirot read the letter again and then a third time, eyebrows inclined towards each other like two polite conspirators. He lifted the paper to the light. The fibers were expensive, yet the pen had stuttered in 2 places. There was a blot at the word protection, and the T, crossed late, suggested a moment's change of heart. A faint ridge marked the page down the left margin, a pressure as though a second sheet, perhaps a carbon, had been once laid beneath and then removed. He allowed himself a small, satisfied murmur. Ah! The crest impressed on the paper showed a rearing stag over a motto that might have been Latin if one were forgiving. The envelope bore a Guildford postmark from the previous afternoon. The address was in the same hand, but steadier. A secretary for the envelope, the lady for the letter? Or simply a calm before panic? He folded the letter with care and set it beside his cup. A silver casket, he said aloud, tasting the phrase like a sweet. And a latch that is curious. The curiosity is often the key, NSCE par. He disliked haste, but he telephoned at 3 precisely. The call was answered on the second ring, and cut off when he gave the agreed salutation about a lamp. A moment later, the same line returned with a whisper at the edge of breath. Lady Fenton speaking. Madam, said Poirot, it is Hercule Poirot. I have received your letter. Will you come? The question had too many words inside it. If it pleases you, he replied, and if you will forgive that I ask a single question in return. Yes. This casket, you fear it. A pause, a rustle of something against the mouthpiece. No. I fear what may be found through it. Bien. Then I come. You will expect me on Friday afternoon. Thank you, she said, and the line went dead with a small gasp, as if the telephone itself had been relieved of a burden. Poirot rang off and stood a moment by the window, looking upon the street with its weekday composure. People moved with purpose and, perhaps, with their own secret postscripts. He straightened a picture frame by the breadth of a hair and rang for his valet to pack a small case, shirts, a dark dinner suit, the brushes for his moustache arrayed like surgical instruments, and, because one never knew, a travelling magnifier tucked into an inner pocket. The journey down to Surrey the next day was decorous and green. Fields unspooled, hedges wrote their cryptic script along the lanes, and the late summer light fell upon everything with a certainty that made one suspicious. Poirot had a compartment to himself, which is to say that he had the good fortune to occupy it in a manner that dissuaded intrusion. He read nothing. He allowed the little grey cells their promenade. Fenton Manor, he had gathered from a directory and a discreet inquiry to a hotel concierge who knew everything worth knowing, was an estate of old standing, though the money had waxed and waned. Lady Fenton, née Evelyn Harbury, had married into it 20 years ago. Her husband, Sir Rowland, had been dead these 5 years. There was mention, just a line, in a social column about a cousin, a military man returned from overseas engagements, and a physician attending the household during a bout of influenza last winter. A solicitor, too, Mr. Henry Cartwright of Cartwright and Bell, had lately handled the sale of a parcel of land on the estate's southern edge. All ordinary matters to those who wished to see them as ordinary. The car sent to fetch him from the station was older than the chauffeur's cap and smelled of leather that had decided to be dignified rather than supple. They drove through a timbered village and past a church whose spire kept its secrets, then up a long drive lined with beeches. The house came into view by degrees, first the chimneys like sentries, then the roof, then the facade with its central door and the windows that seemed to watch their own reflections in the gravel sweep. A housekeeper, tall and very much used to being so, met him in the hall. The hall had been designed to intimidate but had settled, over the years, for being impressive. Trophies looked down from shadowed corners, stags, obviously, and portraits of Fentons whose eyes had long ago forgiven their painters. The housekeeper's name was Mrs. Rowe. She gave it as if it were an address he might write to. Lady Fenton is in the morning room, sir. If you would care to follow me. Poirot cared to. He walked at a measured pace that permitted the noting of small things, a brass latch burnished more on the right than the left, a narrow table by the stairs nicked at exactly the height of a valise, a faint smear of metal polish on a newel post, as if a hand had hesitated, unsure where to leave its industriousness. The morning room was full of light and worry. Lady Fenton rose from a settee with the air of someone who has become lighter by deciding to act. She was in her early 50s, perhaps, elegant but practical in a dress of soft blue. Her hands came together and went apart without finding rest. Her eyes were grey and direct, and they looked, for a moment, like someone who had been given a reprieve. Mr. Poirot, thank you. Lady Fenton, he bowed, it is the pleasure. He took the chair she indicated. On a small table between them lay a silver casket the size of 2 books placed side by side. It was beautiful in a way that made beauty secondary to design, panels finely chased, corners rounded as by the thumb of time, and on the front a latch shaped like a serpent devouring its tail. You see, she said, following his glance. The latch. It belonged to my husband's grandmother, who acquired it in Vienna, or so the story runs. It left the family under circumstances which, well, they were not creditable. I bought it back last month at auction. It is said to hold a secret compartment. I have not found it, but others have tried. I have asked a few people this weekend, family, a friend or two, to see it with me. The casket has become a sort of symbol. A symbol of the family restored. Poirot suggested. Perhaps. Or perhaps of things that cannot be restored. She smiled then, quick and rueful. You think me fanciful. I think, madam, that you are anxious, and that anxiety, when it chooses a symbol, Chooses well. He leaned fractionally forward. You spoke in your letter of a protection. She looked past him, towards the lawn where the sun lay on the grass as if it meant to stay there forever. Mr. Poirot, I have enemies. That is melodramatic, but it will do. Not enemies who wear masks and climb walls, but people who love me badly, or not at all, while needing me very much. I am hosting them. I do not wish to, but there it is. One cannot choose one's cousin, nor one's solicitor. One can barely choose one's companions. And yet you invited them, he murmured. Yes. She folded her hands with decision, as if imprisoning their tremor. Because if there is a storm, I had rather it break upon my roof while I am ready to count the raindrops. Poirot allowed his eyes to return to the casket. The latch was extremely smooth, polished in a pattern that suggested many fingers had worked it, and yet the tiny recess where a pin might hide was duller, as if untouched. He did not reach for it. He looked instead at the table's wood, where a faint oval of tarnish marked a place the casket had not long ago occupied, slightly to the left. A movement then, a repositioning now. Who knows that you have reacquired it? He asked. Everyone. That was my mistake and my defense. If secrets must exist, let them be large and obvious at first. The danger, I think, is not the casket itself but what it may prove, or disprove. She raised her chin. I mean to open it tonight, in company, and to say that if there is a secret, it is a family secret and must be faced. I should be grateful if you would attend and keep your eyes open. Poirot inclined his head. It is what my eyes do. She exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath all morning. You will find your room prepared. We dine at 8. The others arrive by 6. The others. My cousin, Captain Willoughby. He has been abroad and has seen too much sun. He will not like being indoors. A pause. Mr. Cartwright, our solicitor. He enjoys rules so long as he makes them. Dr. Brooke, who has been kind in my ill humours and thinks he understands me. And my companion, Miss Montrose, who understands me too well. And the Latch, Poirot said, rising, understands everybody not at all. That is its safety. He took up his hat and cane. At the door he paused and looked back, not at Lady Fenton, but at the silver casket. The light from the window made a wavering river across its lid. The serpent's mouth, closing upon its tail, kept its own counsel. The room smelled faintly of lavender and metal polish, a marriage of past and present. Poirot nodded to himself, as though a small point of etiquette had been observed. Outside, the house rearranged itself slightly around his presence, as houses do when they welcome someone who will notice the difference between what they are and what they mean to be. He climbed the stairs to his room, counting them without counting. He noted the threadbare strip near the landing where a heavy footfall always turned. He smiled at a tiny silver smear on the banister, exactly at the height of a careful hand. It promised to be an interesting evening. He put away his clothes, aligned his brushes, and, after a moment's thought, placed his magnifier on the table, not by the bed, but by the window, where the light would choose to be when secrets chose to show themselves. Chapter 2. The Guests. The day of arrival descended with a subtle weight upon Fenton Manor. The sky hung low with a gauzy veil of cloud, neither threatening rain nor granting brightness, and the house seemed to adjust its breath to this uncertain weather. Inside, carpets muffled footsteps and a faint smell of beeswax floated in the air, the unmistakable odour of a house preparing itself to be judged by guests. Hercule Poirot, comfortably settled in the guest chamber allotted to him, smoothed the crease of his tie before making his way downstairs to observe the theatre of introductions. It was a little before 6 when the first guest was announced. Captain Willoughby. Captain Arthur Willoughby entered with the controlled swagger of a man who had not yet decided whether to boast or apologize for his life abroad. Tall, broad of shoulder, and ruddy in complexion, he carried the scent of leather and tobacco into the hall. His gait was stiff, an old injury, Poirot surmised, and his greeting to Lady Fenton was brusque but not unkind. "Evelyn," he said, shaking her hand with an economy of warmth. "You look well. Surrey has been kinder to you than Mesopotamia has been to me." Lady Fenton smiled faintly, though Poirot noted how her lips pressed together after. Willoughby's eyes roved about the hall, alighting with scant interest upon the trophies, before fixing briefly on Poirot. "And who might this be?" Lady Fenton introduced him. Willoughby raised his brows, then gave a short laugh. "Ah, the detective. Well, I suppose it does no harm to have an extra pair of eyes in the house." Poirot bowed slightly, unoffended. "It is always better, Captain, to have eyes that look closely, n'est-ce pas? For otherwise one may step in the wrong trench." The military man blinked, then gave a grunt that might have been amusement. He strode off to inspect the drawing-room, leaving behind an impression of impatience, as though social niceties were merely another campaign to be endured. Miss Clara Montrose. The second arrival, scarcely a quarter-hour later, was Miss Clara Montrose. She was a young woman of perhaps 25, slim and fair, with eyes of a light, sharp blue that never quite settled where they looked. She entered almost apologetically, clutching a small valise, though Poirot perceived that her glance swiftly measured the room, the furniture, and every person present. "Lady Fenton," she said with an air of rehearsed gratitude, "thank you for allowing me to return earlier than expected. I trust one am not an inconvenience." Lady Fenton embraced her lightly. "Not at all, Clara. You are as much at home here as I." But Poirot caught the faint tightening of Lady Fenton's jaw, as though she spoke out of duty rather than delight. Miss Montrose curtsied, then withdrew to a chair with the nervous energy of a bird that has not decided whether to perch or to fly away. She fiddled with her gloves, then with a brooch at her collar, then with nothing at all, her fingers restless without occupation. Poirot made a little bow to her. "Mademoiselle, you are the companion of Lady Fenton, I think." "Yes," Clara replied quickly, almost defensively. "I can assist her, when she wishes it." "A most delicate role," said Poirot. "For to assist without intruding, and to attend without appearing to observe, that is the art of discretion." Her eyes flickered, and a blush rose on her cheek. Poirot filed the response neatly in his mind. "Dr. Brooke." The next arrival was heralded by a cheerfully officious knock and the scent of antiseptic. Dr. Alistair Brooke entered, a man of middle years with thinning hair and a kindly, ruddy face. He carried a black leather case in one hand, though he assured Lady Fenton he brought it out of habit rather than necessity. "My dear Lady Fenton, I trust you are keeping well," he said with genial authority. "No lingering coughs? No faintness of breath? No? Splendid, splendid." He bowed to Poirot with enthusiasm. "The famous detective! I've heard of you, sir. Splendid work in London, quite splendid. Though I confess, I never thought I should meet you in Surrey of all places." Poirot accepted the compliment gravely. "The world, doctor, is full of surprises. One must merely apply order to them." Dr. Brooke chuckled and launched into an anecdote about a patient who insisted on carrying a live parrot into the surgery. Poirot allowed himself a smile, but behind the jovial exterior he observed an undercurrent of eagerness, even anxiety, a man too ready to please, too willing to fill silence with chatter. "Mr. Cartwright." Finally, as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 6, Mr. Henry Cartwright arrived. He was thin and precise, dressed in a dark suit that seemed a part of him, not an adornment. His greeting to Lady Fenton was respectful but cool, as though he were addressing a business associate rather than a friend. "Lady Fenton," he said, bowing, "I trust matters proceed to your satisfaction." Poirot noted the phrase carefully. Not "how are you?" or "how do you fare?" but "matters proceed." a solicitor who spoke always in terms of affairs rather than emotions. Introduced to Poirot, he inclined his head. "I am acquainted with your reputation. I admire efficiency." "Merci," Poirot replied with a little smile. "Though efficiency without elegance, monsieur, is but half the art." Cartwright did not smile. His narrow eyes observed Poirot in silence, as though calculating the weight of every word spoken. Dinner preparations. By the time all had gathered in the drawing-room, the air was thick with unease disguised as civility. Captain Willoughby sprawled in a chair, smoking and speaking of campaigns in Africa with a deliberate disregard for refinement. Miss Montrose perched silently, fingers forever restless. Dr. Brooke filled gaps with cheerful anecdotes, though his laughter was just slightly too loud. Mr. Cartwright listened more than he spoke, and when he did, it was only to correct a detail or offer a fact, never an opinion. Poirot sat serenely, observing. His moustaches, faultlessly waxed, twitched slightly when Willoughby mocked Cartwright's clerical solemnity, or when Clara dropped her glove and retrieved it with visible agitation. Each gesture, each word, Poirot noted and tucked away like beads upon a string. At last Lady Fenton entered, composed but pale, her gown of dove-grey silk shimmering faintly in the lamplight. All rose at her presence. "My friends," she said softly, "I am grateful to you for coming. Tonight I wish to show you something which belongs to the family. It has, for many years, been absent, but I have restored it to its rightful place. We will dine shortly, and afterwards I shall unveil it." Her words, spoken with calm dignity, were met with polite applause. But Poirot, watching closely, observed how Willoughby's hand tightened on the arm of his chair, how Clara's eyes darted towards the hall as if measuring escape, how Cartwright's gaze flickered momentarily towards the locked cabinet at the far wall, and how Dr. Brooke, smiling too broadly, reached for a second glass of sherry before the first was finished. The scene was set. The players had assembled. And in the quiet gleam of Lady Fenton's eyes, Poirot discerned both resolve and dread. Dinner was announced. The company rose, and with it, a subtle tension rose too, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Poirot, stepping aside to allow Lady Fenton to lead the way, murmured to himself. "Voila! The guests, they are arrived. Each one wears a mask, and beneath each mask, a secret. We shall see which mask cracks first." Chapter 3, The Unveiling. Dinner at Fenton Manor was served with the dignity of tradition, though beneath its silver cloches and measured courses lay a strain perceptible even to the dullest guest. Poirot, whose palate was as exacting as his eye, noted the fine but slightly overcooked sole, the excellent claret, and the silence that sometimes swallowed conversation whole. Lady Fenton presided with calm determination, though the tremor in her hand returned when she reached for her glass. The company performed their roles. Captain Willoughby filled gaps with stories of heat and dust, delivered in tones too loud for the quiet panelled dining room. Dr. Brooke responded with jovial "Indeed, indeed," as though applause might ease the awkwardness. Miss Montrose smiled when spoken to but seemed distracted, her fork tracing anxious patterns on her plate, and Mr. Cartwright spoke little, though when he did, it was always to correct a date or insist upon a definition, the words as sharp as the creases of his cuffs. Poirot observed all with genial detachment, nodding, listening, occasionally contributing a modest remark. He noted how Lady Fenton, though apparently composed, rarely allowed her eyes to rest on any guest for more than a moment. She moved her gaze as one might move a candle in a draught, never letting it linger long enough to be extinguished. At last the meal ended. Coffee was served in the drawing-room, its fragrance mixing with the subtle sweetness of polished wood. The fire had been laid though not lit, the evening being temperate, and the lamplight pooled upon the silver tray where small cups gleamed like attentive ears. Lady Fenton rose. Her guests followed suit, curiosity kindling like dry tinder. "My friends," she said, her voice steady but low, "you have indulged me in this little gathering. I thank you. Now, as I promised, I will show you the piece I have lately restored to the family, the silver casket of my husband's grandmother. It is a thing of beauty, but more than that, it has become to me a symbol of the endurance of truth. Allow me. She crossed to a cabinet against the far wall, produced a small key from a chain at her wrist, and unlocked the door. From within, upon a velvet cushion, she drew out the casket. Gasps, polite but genuine, arose from the company. It was indeed remarkable. The box was of antique workmanship, silver chased with intricate patterns of vines and flowers, its surface catching the lamplight in restless ripples. But most striking was the latch, shaped as a serpent biting its tail, forming a perfect circle. Its surface gleamed from much handling, yet beneath that polish lay something older, sterner. The latch seemed at once an ornament and a puzzle, a challenge set in metal. "Magnificent!" cried Dr. Brooke, bending forward as though to diagnose it. "Quite magnificent. And you say it hides a secret?" "So it is said," Lady Fenton replied. "A compartment known to few, if any. I have not found it, though others before me have tried. Perhaps it contains nothing but air. Still, it has always drawn speculation, and speculation is sometimes more dangerous than truth." Willoughby snorted. "A family bauble, nothing more. A serpent biting its tail, eh? Apt enough symbol for this house, turning in circles, chasing its own tail." Cartwright interjected in his dry tone, "The device is known as the Ouroboros. An ancient emblem. Endless return, perpetual renewal. Not without significance in matters of inheritance, Lady Fenton." Lady Fenton inclined her head, her lips tightening. "Precisely so. That is why I wished it back in the family. To show that what is lost may be reclaimed, and that secrets need not remain secrets forever." Poirot, standing a little apart, studied not the casket but the faces. Clara Montrose's eyes glittered with a nervous fascination, her fingers clasping and unclasping in her lap. Willoughby leaned forward, his ruddy face taut with skepticism but his gaze fixed intently upon the box. Brooke's eyes shone with curiosity, yet behind them Poirot glimpsed an unease, as though he feared what truth might emerge. Cartwright alone remained impassive, but Poirot noticed how his hands rested precisely upon his knees, fingers unmoving, too deliberate in their stillness. Lady Fenton placed the casket upon the central table. "You see, it opens." She pressed the latch. The serpent yielded with a soft click, and the lid lifted, revealing an interior lined with dark velvet. Empty. The company exhaled as one. The tension in the room fell a degree, replaced by an odd disappointment. "Nothing," said Willoughby. "So much fuss, and it's hollow." Lady Fenton's smile was thin. "Hollow, perhaps. But a thing need not hold jewels to hold meaning." Poirot bent forward, peering in. "Exquisite workmanship," he murmured. "And yet, if I may," he touched the lining delicately with a fingertip. "This velvet is not original. It has been replaced." "Why?" "Perhaps to conceal an aperture." Cartwright's voice was sharp. "Speculation, Monsieur Poirot. Without evidence." Poirot spread his hands. "Mais oui, monsieur. Without evidence one cannot conclude. But one may observe." He tapped lightly at the side. The faintest hollow echo answered. "Observe, and await the right time." Clara, who had been silent, burst suddenly into speech. "It must open. I have tried, Lady Fenton and I examined it together, and I was sure," she broke off, colour flooding her cheeks. "I mean nothing." Lady Fenton placed a hand gently on her arm. "Enough, Clara. Whatever lies within, if anything, it can wait. Tonight we simply acknowledge its return. That is all." The casket was closed again. Lady Fenton replaced it in the cabinet and turned the key with a firmness that seemed both protective and resigned. But Poirot's eyes, sharp beneath his serene brow, had caught something in that moment, Willoughby's jaw tightening, Clara's suppressed agitation, Brooke's hand twitching towards his case as though reflexively, and Cartwright's gaze, fixed, calculating, and then quickly withdrawn. The evening wound down with polite conversation, yet the atmosphere had altered. Curiosity, disappointment, and a subtle disquiet lingered in the air like smoke after a candle is snuffed. The guests retired to their rooms earlier than expected. Later, when Poirot passed through the hall on his way upstairs, he paused before the cabinet. The latch gleamed faintly in the lamplight, the serpent's mouth eternally closing upon its tail. To most it was an ornament, perhaps a puzzle. To Poirot, it was something more, a symbol, yes, but also a lock upon secret someone was desperate either to guard or to steal. He straightened his moustache with 2 fingers and murmured to himself. Already, the storm gathers. The silver casket is not empty, it is full. Full of suspicion, of fear, of motives yet to be revealed. We shall see who dares to open it, and at what price. With that, Poirot ascended the stairs, leaving the drawing-room dark, the cabinet locked, and the serpent waiting in silence for the night to come. Chapter 4: The Tragedy. The house woke early, though no one would later agree who first heard the sound. Some said it was a faint metallic click, others, that the wind had fretted at a shutter. Mrs. Rowe insisted she had known, before ever a cry was uttered, that something had gone wrong with the morning. In any case, dawn crept over the lawns with a pale, uncommitted light, and Fenton Manor held its breath. Poirot, who had slept as neatly as he did everything else, rose at 7 and took a short constitutional along the corridor before breakfast. He noticed small things, a cigar ash on the carpet near the landing, too dark for Willoughby's lighter cigarettes, a draught moving the fringes of a table runner though the windows were shut, and, on a side table, a brown glass bottle with a label neatly written in a medical hand, tonic, 5 milliliters as required. The cork sat beside it, shaved down slightly, as though it had been coaxed to fit a neck not its own. He replaced the cork with delicate fingers and was turning to go when a thin, torn cry broke across the hush of the house. It came from the eastern corridor. Poirot made for it at once, his steps brisk, precise, unfussy. Doors opened, voices called, the household converged upon Lady Fenton's room. Mrs. Rowe stood to one side, white as linen, a key in her shaking hand. She did not answer, she stammered. I brought the tea, I knocked 3 times, and then I fetched the master key. I should not have, but, oh, sir. Courage, Poirot said gently. Open, if you please. The door yielded. At once the room presented itself in a tableau both serene and terrible. The curtains were half drawn, the air held a faint, sweet odour that set a quiet alarm ringing in Poirot's mind. Lady Fenton lay in the bed, propped against pillows, her face turned slightly aside as if to listen to some distant, consoling voice. Her complexion had a waxen stillness. On the bedside table stood a water glass, a silver spoon, and a small porcelain cup with a trace of cloudy residue. Beside the bed, on a chair, rested the silver casket, open, its velvet interior exposed like a wound. For a moment no one moved. Then Dr. Brooke pushed forward with professional reflex. He went to the bed, bent, felt for a pulse he surely knew he would not find, and drew back with a softness that sat oddly upon his usually jovial face. She is gone, he said, and the words landed with a dull weight. Some hours, I should think. Perhaps in her sleep. Her sleep? Cartwright's voice came clipped and dry from the doorway. You are certain? No, not certain, Brooke corrected hastily, as if he had suddenly remembered the need for caution. I mean only that she has, well, this is not a matter for conjecture. We must send for the police. Clara Montrose, who had pressed herself against the far wall, whispered, the casket, why is it here? Her eyes darted from the open box to Lady Fenton's still face and back again. It was locked away. Indeed, said Poirot softly. Last night it was locked, and the key remained at Lady Fenton's wrist. He glanced at her limp hand and saw the fine chain broken, a tiny raggedness where a link had snapped. Ah. Willoughby shouldered his way in, his ruddy face suddenly drained of colour. What devilry is this? Who brought that thing up here? He swung towards the housekeeper. Mrs. Rowe. Not I, sir, she protested, the key shaking between her fingers. I lock the cabinet at night and I keep the keys in my, oh, dear God, she clutched at her apron. The drawer in the pantry, yesterday it stuck, perhaps. Enough, Poirot said, not unkindly, but with an authority that steadied them all. Dr. Brooke, you will keep everyone from touching anything. Mrs. Rowe, be so good as to telephone the local police. Monsieur Cartwright, you are a man of method, you will note, please, the names of all who have entered this room. He turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, fetch a shawl for yourself, you are cold. Clara obeyed like a sleepwalker. Willoughby stood by the hearth, a fist at his mouth, glaring at the open casket as though it had insulted him personally. Poirot approached the bedside with a reverence that was not sentiment, but respect for the dead and for truth. He did not touch Lady Fenton's body, but he leaned close enough to confirm what his first breath had told him, the barest whisper of bitter almonds hung in the air. He let his gaze travel, the slight bluish cast to the lips, the absence of disturbance in the bedclothes, the book by the lamp, splayed open on a page marked by a ribbon. Not a struggle, then. Not fear, at least, not at the end. A swift death. He moved to the chair where the casket sat today. The serpent latch was unmarked, its silver mouth still closed upon its tail. No scratches. No bruising to the neighbouring metal. The velvet lining bore a shallow impression, something had lain there recently, rectangular, not large, removed with care. On the carpet below he saw a sliver of brittle paper, the colour of old sky. He fetched it with the corner of a handkerchief and held it to the light. It might have been part of a margin, the edge of a folio. Faint, in the fibres, a suggestion of blue-black, the ghost of ink. Doctor, Poirot said without turning his head, will you tell me what remedies Lady Fenton took at night? Brooke hesitated. A draught to steady the nerves, sometimes. I prescribed a mild sedative. Nothing dangerous. Poirot's eye slid, very gently, to the porcelain cup, then to the water glass, then to the spoon. A faint smut marked the rim of the cup where lips had touched. On the spoon, a dulling he did not care for. He did not lift either object, not yet. Willoughby swore under his breath. If this is murder, and by God, it looks like it, then it occurred under this roof, in a house locked for the night, with all of us within it. That casket, what was in it? No one replied. The question seemed to settle upon the furniture like dust. Perhaps nothing, Cartwright said at last, his voice steady with effort. We saw last night that it was empty. Empty then, monsieur, Poirot murmured. Not necessarily empty now. Emptiness is a condition that may be remedied, or created. He stood back, looking at the room as a whole. The window was latched on the inside, the curtains, drawn in completely, allowed a narrow blade of light to strike across the carpet. On the writing desk he observed a blotter, a pen, and a sheaf of Lady Fenton's personal stationery. The top sheet bore the indented impress of a letter written recently and torn away, the nib of the pen showed the dullness of much use, the blotter carried, faint but distinct, the reversed outline of two words, no trust. Poirot filed the phrase. He went to the wardrobe, not to snoop but to see what the room chose to say. A shawl hung half off its hook, a drawer gaped slightly, not wide, just shy of flush as if to suggest haste where there should have been order. Yet nothing was strewn. The chaos here was subtle, deliberate. A careful person had been careful not to leave signs, and, in so doing, had left them. The police arrived with a bustle that tried to be respectful and succeeded only in being loud. Inspector Latham, a square man with a skeptical chin, took charge briskly. He had the decency to hear Dr. Brooke's account and the sense to keep his tone level when Poirot introduced himself. "Monsieur Poirot," Latham said, measuring him. "I thought I knew the day's difficulties, but this, well. You've seen the deceased?" "I have looked," Poirot said. "I have not disturbed." "Good. We'll keep it that way till the doctor from the county arrives." Latham's gaze settled on the casket. "And that thing?" "A family piece, Cartwright supplied. Last night it was locked away. Yet here it is, open as a church door." Latham crouched, peered, grunted. No forced window. Door was locked from the outside. Mrs. Rowe shook her head miserably. "There is no key, sir. Her ladyship would not have them. She said a bedroom ought to be open in case of a fall. I knocked this morning. When there was no answer, I feared." Her voice broke. "Who last saw Lady Fenton alive?" Latham asked, taking out a notebook. "I did," said Clara, very low. "I brought her shawl after dinner. She said she felt the draught. She told me to leave the casket well alone, that it meant more than it showed. That was all. She looked at the open box and swallowed. I left her at 10:30. Anyone else?" Latham's pencil hovered. Dr. Brooke raised a hand. "I looked in at 11:15 with a draught. She had asked me earlier for something to steady her. She was quite herself. I left the bottle on the side table in the corridor. I was called away. Mrs. Rowe had someone at the back door with a cut hand. By the time I returned to fetch it, it had gone." He flushed. "Which is to say, I did not retrieve it. The bottle labelled tonic, 5 milliliters as required?" Poirot asked, without looking up from the blotter he was studying. Brooke blinked. "Yes." "How did you?" "It is returned now," Poirot said mildly. "By whom and when are questions for the inspector." He straightened, smoothed his moustache. "Monsieur Latham, I make one observation only. There is here the odour of bitter almonds." Latham's pencil paused. "You're saying cyanide?" "I am saying an odour," Poirot replied. "Nothing more, for the moment." Latham nodded, shut his notebook with a snap that sounded too loud in the quiet room. "Right. Everyone downstairs, if you please. We'll have statements in the parlour. No one leaves the house." The party drifted reluctantly away, like fragments after an explosion. Poirot lingered a moment longer. He looked once more at Lady Fenton's face, calm now beyond fear, at the broken chain at her wrist, at the casket's innocent gleam. His eye caught on a faint smear of ash at the lip of the box, ash, but not from the cold grate. He touched it with the edge of his handkerchief and lifted a single, fine filament, not ash at all, but a strand of soot-blackened wool, as if a sleeve had brushed it in haste. He glanced towards the hearth. On the fender, a candle snuffer lay askew, its cone smudged with a grey stain that had no business there. He replaced it gently and looked up at the mirror above the mantel. It returned his gaze, ordered, attentive. "Madam," he said quietly to the air, as though to the lady whose presence had steadied the house, "I shall do you the justice. We will find what was taken from your silver box, and who took it, and why they feared it." Then he turned and followed the living back into the bright, exposed regions of the day. Chapter 5. The Suspicions. The parlour at Fenton Manor had been transformed into a court of sorts, though no gavel sounded and no bench was raised. The heavy curtains filtered the morning light, so that each person's face seemed half-shadowed, half-exposed, a fitting image for a household where truth and concealment now wrestled for mastery. Inspector Latham, stout and brusque, established his headquarters at a polished oak table, but Hercule Poirot, sitting modestly to one side, commanded more attention by the stillness of his presence than the inspector did by the authority of his badge. The household gathered reluctantly. Captain Willoughby stood near the mantel, feet planted wide, his military stance softened only by the tremor in his hand as he lit a fresh cigar. Miss Montrose folded herself into a chair, fingers plucking ceaselessly at the stitching of her gloves. Dr. Brooke, perspiring slightly, took the seat nearest the door, as if ready to escape should the atmosphere become too stifling. Mr. Cartwright sat bolt upright, arms resting neatly on his knees, his expression carved from restraint. Mrs. Rowe hovered by the sideboard, wringing her hands into the folds of her apron. Inspector Latham opened proceedings with his notebook. "One at a time, if you please. We'll establish movements and times, then consider the matter of the casket. Mr. Poirot, I trust you'll share your observations as you see fit." Poirot inclined his head. "I am always at the service of truth, Inspector." Captain Willoughby. Willoughby went first, his voice booming against the close air. "I went up to bed at 10:30. I smoke a little before turning in, as is my habit. Slept sound till the cry this morning. That's the sum of it. I neither saw Lady Fenton nor the box after dinner." "You were the last to leave the drawing-room," Cartwright interjected dryly. The captain's eyes narrowed. "And what if I was? Someone has to put out the lamps when the rest scurry off." Poirot, watching the exchange, noted the captain's habit of clenching and unclenching his jaw. His hands, though large, bore faint ink stains along the edge of one finger. Unusual for a man of action, more common for one who had lately handled papers. "Your relation with Lady Fenton, Captain?" Poirot asked gently. Willoughby gave a shrug that tried to be careless but failed. "Cousins. Friendly enough. We've had our disagreements, but nothing beyond words. I've no interest in silver toys or in her affairs." Yet Poirot saw the flash of resentment behind the eyes, the look of a man who felt excluded from decisions that mattered. Miss Clara Montrose. Next came Clara, pale and tense. Her words stumbled into one another. "I carried Lady Fenton's shawl to her room at 10:30. She thanked me and said she would read a while. She seemed thoughtful, not afraid. I noticed the key to the cabinet still at her wrist. She told me that if the casket held anything, it was better left for the morning. That was the last I saw of her." "Did you touch the casket that evening?" asked Poirot softly. Her blush answered before her lips did. "Only to admire it. Lady Fenton showed me once, long ago, how the latch might conceal another mechanism. But it never yielded to me. I swear it." Willoughby gave a harsh laugh. "The companion meddling with family relics. No wonder my cousin grew nervous." Clara flinched. "I loved her," she whispered. "She trusted me." Poirot did not contradict her, though he marked how tightly she twisted the lace at her cuff, as if wringing from it some unspoken truth. "Dr. Brooke." The physician cleared his throat and produced a handkerchief to mop his brow. "At her request, I brought Lady Fenton a draught, a mild sedative, quite harmless in itself. I left it on her table with instructions. I was called away almost at once to attend a cut hand in the kitchen. By the time I returned, the bottle was not where I left it. I assumed Lady Fenton had taken it in herself." Inspector Latham frowned. "Yet this morning the bottle was found outside her room." "Explain that." Brooke spread his hands helplessly. "I cannot. Perhaps a servant tidied it away. Perhaps," he faltered under the inspector's gaze. "In any case, there was nothing poisonous in it. I measured it myself." Poirot's voice cut gently through his protest. "Doctor, did you prepare the draught personally?" Yes. I carry the tinctures with me. And no one else had access. I cannot be sure, Brooke admitted. But I tell you, Monsieur Poirot, it was harmless. His voice rose, then fell again. I would stake my reputation. Poirot merely nodded, as if filing away the offer for future redemption. Mr. Cartwright. Last of the principal guests came the solicitor. His testimony was crisp, precise, like the man himself. I retired at 9:30 to read documents. At 10:45 I extinguished my lamp. I did not see Lady Fenton again. As to the casket, I considered it a sentimental trinket. My role here is legal, not antiquarian. Poirot raised a brow. And yet you showed much knowledge last evening of the latch, of its emblem, of its meaning. For a trinket, you observed it closely. Cartwright met his gaze without flinching. Professional habit. I observe all things closely. It is why I am a solicitor, and not a poet. The faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth suggested pride in the retort. But Poirot saw also how the man's right hand never left the pocket of his jacket, and how his eyes, whenever unobserved, flicked towards the cabinet as though measuring what remained hidden there. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rowe, called upon, recounted her discovery of the body, her trembling words broken by sobs. She swore she had not touched the casket, nor seen anyone near Lady Fenton's room in the night. Her grief, raw and genuine, offered no immediate suspicion, yet Poirot noted her repeated insistence that she had kept the keys safe, even before she had been asked. Over protest, perhaps, or merely guilt at negligence. Poirot reflects. When all had spoken, Inspector Latham snapped his notebook shut. We'll send the body for examination. Until then, no one leaves the house. This was no natural death, not with cyanide in the air. A shiver ran through the room. Clara hid her face in her hands, Willoughby cursed, Brooke muttered of impossibility, Cartwright said nothing at all. Poirot rose, smoothing his jacket with meticulous care. Miss Amos, forgive that I offer a reflection. Each of you had opportunity. Each of you has motive, whether small or large. Captain Willoughby, you quarrelled with Lady Fenton over matters of estate. Mademoiselle Montrose, you feared dismissal from her service. Dr. Brooke, your medicines provide the means. And Monsieur Cartwright, you are too careful, perhaps. Too careful by half. They stared at him, some with anger, some with dread. Poirot continued, unruffled. But murder, it is not a thing of chance. It is an act of the will, and the will always betrays itself. Already I have seen small things, the ash of a cigar where it should not be, the blush that comes too swiftly, the explanation too ready, the silence too absolute. These, they are the crumbs that lead to the truth. He turned to the inspector with a slight bow. For the present, we permit no conclusion. The dead lady deserves more than haste. But soon, the grey cells will arrange the picture, and then, Miss Amos, we shall see whose mask will crack. The guests shifted uneasily. Outside, a breeze stirred the beeches and rattled the windows faintly, as though the house itself whispered its secrets. Poirot sat again, calm, composed, and waiting. Chapter 6, The Clues. The morning dragged itself onward under a hush that no clatter of crockery could dispel. Breakfast was taken with more formality than appetite, cups clinked but remained half-filled, toast was buttered and forgotten. Conversation, when it emerged at all, was brittle, like glass that might crack beneath the slightest pressure. Poirot, however, seemed entirely at ease, sipping chocolate and regarding his fellow guests with the benign patience of a schoolmaster waiting for pupils to betray themselves. When the meal ended, Inspector Latham excused himself to consult with his constables, leaving Poirot a freedom he did not waste. He moved through the house, not with furtive haste but with quiet assurance, as if the rooms themselves would confide their secrets if treated with courtesy. The bedchamber. He began once more in Lady Fenton's chamber. The body had been removed, but the room retained the sense of a presence not yet dispersed. Poirot's nostrils caught again that faint, sweet almond odour, though it had faded beneath the scent of lavender sachets. He approached the bedside table. The porcelain cup remained, now sealed in a constable's envelope, but Poirot had earlier noted the clouded residue clinging to its rim. He looked instead at the silver spoon. Holding it delicately by the handle, he tilted it to the light. The metal was dulled, faintly etched, as though something corrosive had touched it. He replaced it gently. Then the cabinet. Its lock had been resecured, the serpent latch gleaming with impudent innocence. Poirot leaned close. The polish upon the silver showed a faint smudge, fingerprints, no doubt, but what struck him more was the tiny fragment of fibre caught in the hinge. Dark wool, twisted, the kind one might find at the cuff of a coat hastily drawn away. He teased it free with a pin and wrapped it in his handkerchief. Finally, at the writing desk, he studied again the blotter. The indented words "No Trust" remained, and below them, almost invisible until he angled the lamp, another phrase, "Prove it." Together they suggested a sentence half lost, but to Poirot they whispered of a quarrel, or perhaps a discovery that demanded evidence. The cigar ash. Poirot next walked the corridor outside. The ash he had noticed earlier still lay by the skirting board, undisturbed. He stooped, gathered a pinch between finger and thumb, and examined its texture. Not the light flakes of a cigarette, but the darker, heavier residue of a cigar. He smiled faintly. Captain Willoughby, then. But had he admitted to smoking in the corridor? None. He had claimed he retired to his room at 10:30 and smoked there before sleep. Yet here, evidence of wandering. Poirot tapped the ash delicately into a small envelope and slipped it into his pocket. "It is always the small disorder," he murmured, "that betrays the large lie." The companion's anxiety. Descending to the morning room, he found Clara Montrose seated stiffly at the window, her hands twisting a handkerchief until the seams strained. She started when Poirot entered. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you are troubled." Her lips parted, but she made no denial. "I cannot believe it. She was kind to me, even when others thought me an intrusion. And now they will say, oh, I know what they will say." Poirot sat opposite her. "They will say only what the truth permits." "But the truth, it has a way of being shy, yes? It hides behind curtains, it waits in shadows. One must coax it into the light." "I never harmed her," Clara burst out. "Yes, I touched the casket, I tried the latch, I thought if I could find the secret, she would be pleased with me. But she laughed, said it was no use, that such things reveal themselves only to those meant to see. That was all." "And yet you looked again," Poirot suggested. Clara's eyes widened. "How do you know?" "The fingertips, mademoiselle. They are faintly reddened, sign of pressure. One presses, one twists, one grows impatient." "Ah, but that is nothing of crime. It is curiosity, and curiosity is not guilt. But remember, curiosity can place one at the scene where guilt is committed." She dropped her gaze, and tears welled. Poirot left her to them. Dr. Brooke's case. In the library, Poirot encountered Dr. Brooke rummaging uneasily among his medical bag. At Poirot's raised brow he flushed. I was ensuring I'd not left anything behind. One becomes scatterbrained at such times." Poirot's gaze slid to the bottles within. Tinctures, powders, sedatives, all neatly labelled. Yet one bottle, half empty, bore a label written in a different hand from the rest, "Compound for nerves." Poirot pointed delicately. "This one, when did you prepare it?" Brooke cleared his throat. Only last week. Lady Fenton requested something stronger than valerian. I mixed a draught with bromide. Quite safe, I assure you. Ah, said Poirot, but safety, it is a relative term. A medicine safe in the hand of a doctor may be deadly in the hand of another. And the cork, doctor, it has been shaved, to fit a neck it did not belong to. Curious, is it not? Brooke blanched, then muttered, perhaps the stopper swelled. Cork does that. Poirot smiled faintly and made no reply. The solicitor's calm. Later, in the garden, Poirot found Cartwright walking with measured steps along the gravel path. The solicitor inclined his head politely. You pursue your inquiries, Monsieur Poirot? But naturally. Poirot's eyes flicked to Cartwright's hands, clasped behind his back. The nails were immaculate, the cuticles neat. Yet beneath one nail lingered a faint smear of blue-black, as of ink. You are a man of documents, Poirot said conversationally. Lady Fenton entrusted many papers to your keeping, perhaps. Some, yes. Matters of inheritance. Routine business. And yet she wrote, last night, words of distrust. No trust, prove it. Written, then torn away. To whom would such words be directed, if not to her solicitor? Cartwright's eyes narrowed. You have no proof of their addressee. A lady in her state of nerves may have written of anything, a quarrel with her companion, perhaps, or her cousin. It would be unwise, Monsieur Poirot, to draw hasty conclusions. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Hasty? I know, monsieur. I make only the observations. The conclusions, they wait. Captain Willoughby's temper. Finally, Poirot approached the stables where Willoughby had retreated. The captain was pacing, puffing furiously on a cigar. You'll not pin this on me, he barked as soon as Poirot appeared. Yes, I walked the corridor last night. I could not sleep. I smoked as I went. That is all. I never entered Evelyn's room, by God. Then why not admit it at once? Poirot asked softly. Because it looks bad, doesn't it? She and I quarreled about money, about the estate. I needed her help, and she wouldn't give it. But I never wished her harm. She was my blood. His voice cracked on the last word. Poirot regarded him with calm sympathy. The ash, the wandering, these are not crimes. The crime is elsewhere. Yet each falsehood, Captain, is a shadow that lengthens. Better always to tell the truth, no matter how poor a companion it makes. Willoughby turned away, shoulders rigid, smoke curling about him like accusation. Poirot alone. When evening drew near, Poirot returned to his chamber. He laid out upon the desk his little collection of fragments, the wool fibre, the cigar ash, the ink smear, the blotter words, the dulled spoon. Each, by itself, trivial. Together, a mosaic forming faint outlines. The lady, she was killed by poison, cyanide, almost certainly, Poirot mused aloud. But the poison, how administered? In her cup, yes. And who had access? All of them. The doctor, with his bottles. The companion, with her closeness. The cousin, prowling the halls. The solicitor, with his document she wished to prove. All had motive. All had opportunity. He leaned back, eyes half closed. But only one feared the secret within the casket. And only one, in haste, left traces he would rather have concealed. Patience, my little grey cells. The pattern begins to form. The house, unsettled by grief, creaked as though listening. Poirot rose, straightened his moustache, and extinguished the lamp. Tomorrow, he knew, the truth would draw nearer, like a shadow at dusk, longer, sharper, inescapable. Chapter 7. The Trap. The second evening at Fenton Manor settled heavily upon its inhabitants. Though the clocks ticked and the servants moved with routine, the atmosphere was that of a stage before the curtain rises, tension drawn taut, every movement watched. Hercule Poirot, having considered his small collection of clues, resolved that the time had come to let the players reveal themselves. At supper, conversation was thinner even than the soup. Inspector Latham excused himself early to confer with his constables, leaving Poirot, as he desired, free to conduct matters in his own fashion. When the last dish had been removed, Poirot cleared his throat with the gentle authority of a man accustomed to attention. "Miss Amiss," he said, "I have asked that we gather once more in the drawing-room. There is something yet to be considered, the silver casket. You have seen it open, you have seen it empty. Yet I have reason to believe it has not given up all of its secrets. Tonight, perhaps, it will." A stir went through the company. Clara Montrose's hands flew to her throat, Willoughby's cigar stilled halfway to his mouth, Dr. Brooke muttered an oath, and Cartwright's eyes grew suddenly sharp before settling again into their mask of calm. The stage is set. The drawing-room glowed with lamplight. Poirot, standing before the cabinet, unlocked it with the key Mrs. Rowe had returned to his keeping. He lifted out the silver casket and set it on the central table. Its serpent latch gleamed, mouth eternally closing upon tail, the very emblem of secrets consuming themselves. "My friends," Poirot continued, "the lady of this house is gone. But before her death, she feared this box, not for what it might contain, but for what it might prove. A document, perhaps? A letter? Something of weight enough to cost a life. Tonight, let us see." He pressed the latch. The lid opened with its usual sigh, revealing the dark velvet lining. Empty, as before. Yet Poirot did not appear disappointed. He lifted the box and tilted it in his hands. Then, with a deft touch, he pressed upon a corner of the serpent's circle. A tiny click sounded. From beneath the lining slid a hidden panel, releasing a folded scrap of paper. Gasps echoed about the room. Poirot allowed the paper to fall open upon the table. Its surface was blank, merely an old piece of writing paper, yellowed at the edges. "Mon Dieu!" cried Dr. Brooke, wiping his brow. "All that for nothing?" "Nothing?" Poirot's voice was very soft. "Or everything? Tell me, Doctor, why should a blank page so disturb you?" Brooke blustered. "Disturb? Nonsense. I am merely astonished." But Poirot's sharp eyes caught the nervous tremor in the physician's hand. Watching reactions. Poirot looked about the room. Clara Montrose sat rigid, eyes wide, as if she feared to breathe. Captain Willoughby leaned forward, cigar forgotten, his ruddy complexion now pallid. Cartwright remained still, but in that stillness lay the very essence of strain, his lips pressed thin, his gaze fixed on the paper as though willing it to remain wordless. Poirot folded the page once more and slipped it back into the casket. It is curious, is it not, that a blank sheet can unsettle us more than a page of accusations? And yet, but the human conscience, it knows what it fears to see written. Willoughby surged to his feet. "This is nonsense. Tricks. You're trying to frighten us into confessions. Evelyn's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't murder. Was it not?" Poirot's tone was courteous. "Then why, Captain, did you pace the corridors last night, cigar in hand, though you swore you had gone straight to bed? Why conceal a thing so trivial, unless you feared it would tie you to something greater?" Willoughby flushed darkly. "I told you I could not sleep. I smoked in the corridor, yes. That does not make me a murderer." "Perhaps not," Poirot allowed. "But lies, they are like seeds, one plants them, and they grow beyond control." He turned abruptly to Clara. Mademoiselle, you two concealed something. You pressed the latch in secret, again and again, did you not? Your fingers tell the tale. Why such anxiety? Clara shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. I only wished to help her, to prove myself useful. She laughed at me, said I was chasing shadows. I never meant harm. Poirot inclined his head gravely. I believe you. But intention is one thing, and opportunity another. You were the last to see her alive, save one. He looked to Dr. Brooke. You, doctor. You brought a draught. You left a bottle outside her door, then claim it vanished. Later it was returned, the cork altered. A small thing, but small things matter. Why, doctor? Brooke's joviality crumbled. I swear to you, Poirot, there was nothing poisonous in it. I did not, could not, he faltered, sweat glistening upon his brow. And yet, Poirot said gently, the spoon was etched, the cup bore residue, the air itself smelled of almonds. Cyanide was present. Someone introduced it. A silence fell, heavy as a tomb. Poirot let it linger. The solicitor breaks. At last Cartwright spoke, his voice cold and precise. Enough of these theatrics. You produce a blank paper and expect us to tremble? If Lady Fenton possessed any damaging documents, they would have been with me, her solicitor, not in a trinket box. This performance is unworthy. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Performance? Ah, but monsieur, it is you who perform. Last night, when I pressed upon the casket's velvet, I saw your face blanch. Tonight, at the sight of a paper, though blank, you could not conceal your fear. Why? Because you know what was once written upon such paper. Because you know what Lady Fenton discovered, documents proving embezzlement, forgery, perhaps. Cartwright's lips thinned to nothing. You have no proof. Not yet, Poirot agreed softly. But proof has a way of surviving in fragments, in ink smudged beneath a fingernail, in fibers caught in a hinge, in words indented upon a blotter. Already I see the outline. Soon, it will be complete. Cartwright rose abruptly, muttered something about fatigue, and excused himself. His departure was too hasty, too brittle. Poirot watched him go with the air of a man who has wound a clock and now waits for it to strike. Poirot's reflection. When the others had dispersed, murmuring uneasily among themselves, Poirot lingered in the lamplight beside the casket. He placed a hand upon its lid, almost tenderly. Poor Lady Fenton, he murmured. You sought protection in secrecy, but secrecy is brittle. Once touched, it shatters. What remained in this box? It was not jewels, not treasure. It was truth, and truth, Miss Amos, is heavier than gold. He closed the casket with a quiet click, the serpent's mouth biting once more at its tail. From the shadowed doorway Inspector Latham reappeared, having observed much of the scene. You've stirred the nest, Monsieur Poirot. But will the hornets fly where you expect? Poirot smiled, smoothing his moustache. They will fly, Inspector. They cannot help themselves. And when they do, we shall be ready with the net. Nightfall. The house grew still again as night deepened. Yet the stillness was strained, as though each corridor braced for footsteps, each door listened for a hand upon its latch. In his chamber, Poirot arranged his brushes in perfect alignment, then sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit lawns. Already the pattern was emerging. The lies, the concealments, the little betrayals, they all curved back upon one another, like the serpent's circle. Soon, the circle would close. And then, Poirot promised himself, the truth would bite. Chapter 8, The Truth Revealed. Morning light streamed into Fenton Manor with a deceptive serenity. Birds sang, dew glistened upon the lawns, and the world beyond the windows seemed untouched by human malice. Yet within the house, silence reigned, a silence taut with waiting. Inspector Latham had insisted all remain until the coroner's report was complete. But it was not the coroner who would reveal the truth. Poirot, having risen with the precision of a clock striking the hour, spent his early time polishing his moustaches and aligning his thoughts. At precisely 10 o'clock, he requested that the household assemble once more in the drawing-room. His tone brooked no refusal. They came, each with their own air of reluctance. Captain Willoughby entered first, shoulders squared, defiance stamped upon his ruddy features. Clara Montrose slipped in like a shadow, pale and trembling. Dr. Brooke followed, carrying his medical bag as if it might shield him. Cartwright arrived last, calm and austere, though his eyes betrayed the strain of a man rehearsing arguments in silence. Inspector Latham stood by the fireplace, arms folded, content to let Poirot take the stage. Upon the table rested the silver casket, serpent latch gleaming. Poirot placed his fingertips upon it, as if invoking its authority. Poirot begins. "Miss Amos," he began, voice quiet yet commanding, "we have lived these 2 days beneath the shadow of tragedy. Lady Fenton is dead, not by her own hand, not by chance, but by the deliberate act of another. Last night, I set a little trap. A scrap of paper, blank to the eye, yet heavy with suggestion. I wished to see who would tremble. And tremble they did." He looked around the circle. No one spoke. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, weighing silence against guilt. The crime, it was simple in execution, though complex in motive. Lady Fenton discovered something, proof of betrayal, of theft. She placed it here, within this casket. She confided her fears, perhaps even hinted at them in her letters. And she planned to reveal the truth. That, Miss Amos, is why she died. Dismissing suspicions. Let us consider the suspects. Captain Willoughby. Poirot turned to him, moustaches bristling slightly. "You quarrelled with Lady Fenton over money. You wandered the halls at night, cigar in hand, though you denied it at first. Suspicious, yes? But a quarrel over finance does not equate to murder. You are a man of action, direct, not subtle. Cyanide slipped into a cup is not your style. You lied to conceal a weakness, not a crime." Willoughby exhaled loudly, as if a great weight had shifted from his chest. Poirot's gaze moved to Clara. "Mademoiselle Montrose. You are nervous, anxious, your curiosity led you to press again and again upon the latch of the casket. You feared dismissal. You wished to please your patroness. But no, your devotion was real, your opportunities few. You concealed your attempts from shame, not guilt." Clara's tears welled, but her relief was palpable. Next, Poirot addressed Dr. Brooke. "Doctor, you brought a draught, you left a bottle, and it was tampered with. Indeed, cyanide entered her cup. You blundered, yes, you left medicine unsecured, a folly most grave. But folly is not murder. You had no motive to destroy the lady who trusted your care. Your weakness is vanity, your guilt is negligence, but not crime." Brooke sagged with a groan, his shoulders shaking with mingled shame and relief. The true culprit. Poirot's eyes fixed at last upon Cartwright. His voice dropped to a hush. "And so, monsieur, we come to you. You who were too calm, too measured. You whose hands bore the faint stain of ink, as though you had handled documents in haste. You who alone reacted to the blank paper with fear rather than puzzlement. You whose livelihood depended upon Lady Fenton's trust, yet who had betrayed that trust most thoroughly." Cartwright's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, inexorable. "Lady Fenton discovered your embezzlement. Small sums, perhaps, but over years they grew. She confronted you, demanded you prove your honesty. Her words upon the blotter, "No trust, prove it," these were for you. And she secured the proof of your crime within this casket, intending to confront you in the presence of her household. He tapped the lid of the box. You could not allow it. You alone knew where the key was kept, you alone had opportunity to take it. You entered her chamber, perhaps under pretext of a final word. You removed the document, you destroyed it. And then, to silence her forever, you placed cyanide in her draught. A swift death, leaving little trace, so you thought. The evidence. Cartwright at last found his voice. Mere conjecture. You cannot prove I touched the poison, nor that I destroyed any document. Ah, but I can, Poirot replied, his moustaches twitching with satisfaction. First, the fibre caught in the casket's hinge, black wool, the same as your sleeve. Second, the ink beneath your nail, betraying haste in burning or tearing papers. Third, the dulled spoon, etched by acid traces from your crude admixture. And finally, the reaction of your conscience when I produced a blank page. A guilty man fears even shadows. He spread his hands. These are small things, yes. But it is the small things that create the great pattern. The lady was killed not for jewels, not for family quarrels, but for truth she held against you. Cartwright crumbles. The solicitor's composure faltered. A tremor shook his hands, his voice emerged tight, brittle. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. Too clever. Yes, yes, I took the papers. She would have ruined me, disgraced me. I meant only to silence her threats, but she pressed. I lost control. The poison was at hand. One spoonful, and all was ended. A horrified gasp came from Clara. Willoughby swore under his breath. Dr. Brooke dropped his head into his hands. Inspector Latham stepped forward, hard-eyed. Henry Cartwright, I arrest you for the murder of Lady Evelyn Fenton. Cartwright did not resist. His shoulders slumped, the fight gone from him. He looked once at Poirot with a bitter twist of the mouth. You in your grey cells. If only she had burned the paper outright. If only I had been quicker. Non, monsieur, Poirot interrupted gently. If only you had been honest. Poirot concludes. When Cartwright had been taken away, the room remained hushed, heavy with the echo of confession. Poirot, smoothing his cuffs, addressed the remaining guests. You see, Miss Amiss, murder is rarely born of passion alone. It is born of fear, fear of discovery, fear of disgrace. Lady Fenton feared betrayal, Cartwright feared exposure. Between them lay this little silver box, and within it, the truth. That truth was worth more than her life to him. Yet in the end, it betrayed him all the same. He closed the casket with a click, the serpent's mouth biting its tail once more. Thus the circle is complete. But remember, truth, like the serpent, devours its keeper if he tries to hide it. The other said nothing. Clara wept quietly, Willoughby stared into the fire, Brooke muttered of lessons learned. Poirot alone remained serene, moustaches gleaming in the light, eyes calm. He rose, took his hat and cane, and with a little bow, said, The matter is finished. Justice will have its way. And Hercule Poirot, he will have his chocolate. With that, he departed, leaving behind him a house still reeling from revelation, but freed, at last, from the serpent's coil.